Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, you're very welcome to the World Bank. I particularly welcome to our colleagues in the Inter-American Development Bank and indeed our colleagues in the IMF. We've been partnering since 2006 on the domestic abuse agenda across the organisations, and I'm particularly delighted that almost a decade later, the partnership and the work that we'll be doing is getting better, getting more cohesive, and indeed getting more voice, both within the organisations and indeed the working relationships we have. This time last year, I stood up and gave a long conversation about domestic abuse, but I actually have got some sense because I'm going to hand over to a dear colleague of mine and indeed somebody who's a lot more expert in talking about gender issues, both in relation to the client, but also as a former Minister for Finance in Indonesia, has real life experience of the impact that gender and indeed domestic abuse has for clients, but also somebody who really cares about our staff and indeed our agenda internally. Sri Mulyani Indrawati has really stepped up to the point where she's challenging us as an organisation to make sure that our policies both reflect what we do externally with our clients and indeed with our staff internally. So I'm delighted to hand over to Sri, and she's going to say a few words, and then we continue on with the formats we have. So, Sri Mulyani, thank you.
Thank you, John. And I really stand here on behalf of President Kim, who unfortunately cannot join this event. I want to thank you for being here to launch the October Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I think this is very important, and I'm pleased that the country offices are all also connected via the live stream as well, because I think many of this issue of the domestic violence is also happen, especially in the country office, and for them maybe it's much harder to get the access of help because of the nature of the small office. So that's really good for them to have the access as well as to know this month's awareness. Violence is always a cause. We all know that. It has a devastating on individuals, on families, community, and even for the whole society. And it is particularly burden for women. I was involved in a recent launch of the World Bank report. The title is World Bank Group 2016 Report on Women, Business and Law. This is a series of every year that we are producing a report to identify any of the law which is identified of constraining the activity of women and girls, and women especially in business and economy. This report finds that more than 150 countries have, so this is not only developing country, 150 countries in the world have at least one law that discriminatory toward women. And in 59 countries, there is no law against sexual harassment at work. Myanmar, Uzbekistan, and Armenia are among 46 countries where there are no legal protection against domestic violence. These findings show that we still have a lot of work to do to promote inclusion, and especially when we are really care to achieve our goal of eradicating poverty and promoting shared prosperity. Discrimination and exclusion is still very real, not only in a gender perspective, but we also see in many different categories. But if we look at that, we also see it in a more or less there is a progress. There is a progress. If we look at the 1990s, very few countries had law protecting women from violence, whereas now 127 countries do partially at least in protecting the woman, because the world is more aware of the human and economic cost of mistreating women. Critics will argue that this is that in some countries where gender-specific law exists, the enforcement maybe it's very weak. So the law is one thing, and then the enforcement is another thing. And I'm glad that here we are going to look at the issue, especially for us to be able to not only have a good policy, but how we are going to make sure that that policy implemented so that all staff who need that kind of help will receive a help. This is true. Of course, that better rule of law is definitely associated with having more gender equal law on the books, but more importantly is actually the implementation of that law. So in many countries, they even have a special court that tackle cases of act of violence against women that then can provide help with the legal action. I actually visited Brazil about a couple of months ago, and I visited a project on a dedicated train for a woman, but also all the series of services. That is becoming very, very strong because they just passed the law. They call it the Maria de Peña law. This is the law which allow for the creation of a domestic and family violence court. So they're not only, they really do get the issue of this domestic violence in Brazil is really real, and they want to really implement in a more effective way by having a dedicated court for domestic and family violence. Lebanon also adopted legislation on domestic violence and increased the length of paid maternity leave from 49 to 70 days. Well, I read the news about Amazon, which is now giving, is it full year now, maternity paid? Which is, I think, is quite impressive. Hopefully the whole United States is doing the same thing, I guess. I'm not commenting for this country. In Peru, new legislation was introduced that covers sexual harassment in public spaces. And in Hungary, economic violence has been criminalized as a form of domestic violence. So what is the cause of this domestic violence? The conservative estimates of lost productivity because of this domestic violence range from 1.2% of GDP in Brazil and Tanzania, and in Chile, the estimation even higher, that is 2% of GDP. This is roughly equal to what most governments spend on the whole primary school or primary education. So it's a huge cost. 2% of GDP, as a former finance minister, that's really a lot for a country to have that big cost because of this domestic violence. Here in the United States alone, the victim of intimate partner violence lost a total of 8 million days of paid worker each year. This is exceeding 8.5 billion per year. I think this is really a very big magnitude. If you look at the contribution of the United States to the IDA, our poor country program, this is even bigger. So you can imagine that this is really a big loss. So we don't have to say that this is economically costly, but definitely this is morally wrong. It is illegal, and definitely also, of course, economically costly for any country. So protection from violence is therefore a very critical for development. We take this issue very seriously, but not only in terms of our engagement with the client country. In fact, actually, I just last week in India, and we are also pleased because they introduced me to try a train with a dedicated cart for women. And I ride that train and I have a lot of chat with many of the women passengers. They really actually love it to have this dedicated woman train passengers. But we are actually engaging with many countries and try to make sure that addressing the issue of gender equality. But as Sean mentioned, it will not be credible for the bank to do all this development program with our client country if we are not walk the talk. So internally within the bank, I think we also have to make sure that our institution provide a good, not only policy, but also protection for our staff. We cannot say that the environment which is safe for women is only apply and advocated to our client country, but should be also practice here in this institution. At least 1 in 5 women will suffer from domestic violence in her lifetime. That's really a very big 25%, 1 in 5 women. But I'm not talking about women. I don't want to make all men here feel bad, because sometimes men also are affected by the domestic violence. So while I'm actually advocating many of this women equality, gender equality, I'm not saying that this is only the problem of the woman. So that's why the title domestic violence is not telling about woman, which is a victim of domestic violence. We just said domestic violence or intimate partner violence. So whoever the victim, whether this is woman or man or children, they are really the victim that we really need to be very careful. That statement, the domestic violence or intimate partner violence impact all the socio-economic sectors as well as the economy, and also even impact the culture. It is not only developing country problem in which the World Bank work and engage, but actually many of our shareholders, that is the advanced country, also still facing. And abuse can take various forms. This is not only physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and financial abuse. So when we talk about abuse, it's not always physical, emotional, and psychological as well as financial is actually equally also serious. And those who impacted usually have to hide, sometimes make excuses, and live in a constant fear and uncertainty. They are often unable to leave the relationship because of lack of social or family support, economic or emotional dependency, or even in this case, religious belief or cultural issue, feeling of shame, or fear for themselves and for their children. So the victim in this case is even worse because they feel that they don't have any option in their life. They cannot escape for whatever reason. And this is why I'm proud that the World Bank Group, together with the IMF and the Inter-American Development Bank, partner with us on domestic abuse prevention. And this is a model for best practice and has a robust and holistic domestic violence prevention program. I really encourage those who may need support to not be ashamed and not to reach out for support from this group, or from wherever. You can talk to whoever, your manager or friends, and your manager and your friend is going to contact this group. I really, really want to encourage those who really need it not to be ashamed to reach out to us. I also expect that all managers here in the bank to actively support any staff in crisis, and also to show them how to seek help. I actually, in one conversation with one of ED, saying, oh, they receive a phone call from somebody, and I said, do you really know that we have this institutional mechanism? So I think information sharing is very important, so that everyone who then receive this kind of story or complaint, they can actively help by contacting you all. Well, I want to thank Elizabeth Lagrange as well as Stuart Fisher, who also heading our domestic abuse prevention program. For me, as a managing director and CEO of the bank, I wish this institution, our institution, don't have any domestic violence, so that we don't have this program in this institution. I really wish. But I think I really thank that we have this program, because we know that when there is a violence, then those people, those staff can really get help 24 hours, 7 days a week. So I really appreciate your dedication, your passion, and really like your attention to this unit, which is very critical for us as an institution, not only care about the gender equality, talking with our client, but most importantly, we walk the talk. So with this, I would like to hand over to Stuart Fisher for the next. Thank you very much for having this kind of program.
Thank you, Shri Mulyani, and thank you, Sean. And thank you all for coming here today. As Shri Mulyani said, I'm the Senior Psychologist in the Health Services Department's Counseling Unit and Program Manager for the Domestic Abuse Prevention Program. I'd like to thank the Staff Association, Corporate Security, and WBFN for partnering with us today to bring you today's program. The Domestic Abuse Program is led by Elizabeth Legren, who as its coordinator works closely with our partners at COPE, Inc., and the lawyers at DV Leap. For those of you who don't know, that's the Domestic Violence Legal Empowerment and Action and Appeals Project. I always stumble over that. To ensure that our clients receive a broad array of services. Providing considerable guidance and wisdom is our advisory committee, the members of which include colleagues from legal, ethics, the Staff Association, HR, WBFN, the Ombuds Office, and Corporate Security. And I believe that representatives from nearly all of these groups are here today, and our work would not be possible without them. The program, which was initiated in 2000 by former President Wolfenson and tirelessly advocated by the WBFN, has lent confidential support to countless staff members, spouses, other dependents, and family members over the course of the past 15 years. The WBFN's Barry McIsaac Emergency Fund, established by Mrs. Wolfenson, allocated $11,000 to spouse victims in the past year alone. And I must note here that the WBFN has no ability to fundraise, and this fund survives on donations alone. Since 2010, the utilization of the program has nearly doubled. And in the past year, over 100 bank group staff and spouses were provided with confidential support. 95% were women, 65% were staff, and 10% were from country offices. That said, we recognize the need to increase our outreach to the country offices, and we intend to scale up our support in the coming years. We also recognize that consistent attention is needed to ease the difficulties encountered by trailing spouses. We see the need to mitigate as much as possible the potential negative impact on their careers that results from their choice to accompany their spouses, whether it be to Washington or to country offices where they often encounter difficulty with or even prohibitions against working. We know that some male spouses who were abused do not seek help due to the stigma associated with it, and we want to provide assurance that the bank recognizes these challenges and provides a safe space for men to come forward and get the help that they need.